we step too far. We step too far away from the Lord. Because we step too far away from the Lord, we quote unquote cannot find him. But the instant we pick up grace again, grace pulls us back, right back to God. Anytime when we feel like we're all alone and we pick up grace, because grace can only point in one direction. Grace is like a compass. It can only point in one direction. The only direction it can point is north. And our North Star is God Almighty. That's our North Star. So when we pick up grace, that compass says, there goes God. Go up north. That northern direction, that spiritual northern direction, that's where you will find God. You see, we need that grace because it is that grace that allows us to understand our journey. It's very hard to walk with God for a long time if you don't understand your journey. David understood his journey. David is born the youngest of all of his siblings. And when he was given the job to tend to the sheep, in them days, the youngest always got the worst job. It's not like today. Today, the youngest get spoiled. They get spoiled completely. But in those days, the youngest always got the worst job. Because when the firstborn came, the firstborn, they get all the inheritance, depending on how much the person, and if the father was rich, then, he can hand out multiple inheritances. But, I don't think Jesse was that rich at the time. So when the firstborn show up, they're going to get the lion's share, and everyone gets a little bit. And then when David, being the youngest one, he said, I'm going to throw you out there to the sheep. That's your job. All of his brothers get to relax in the house, get to have a good time. Maybe they're craftsmen, maybe they're doing other things, whatever. But at that time, David is with sheep, smelly sheep. And the prophet Samuel showed up because he was getting ready to anoint the next king of Israel. And each one of them, the horn of the oil wouldn't melt. That's what used to happen in those days. You see now, the oil comes pre-melted, so I can anoint anybody and you think it's the real deal. But in those days, the oil was solid. And God had to melt the oil. And if God didn't melt the oil, so what it meant was that the chances of a prophet making a mistake was very little because literally God would not move until the conditions were right. Today, we, anyways, we're not going to go into that part. Anyways, but, so he's going one by one. Not working. And Samuel knows I'm at the right place, but I don't have the right person. Is there one more? And he said, yes, and just go fetch for your son. And David shows up. The horn of the oil melted. And the anointing, symbolizing grace, flow all over him. That was the beginning of his journey with grace. And David tended to the sheep, and basically after that, we don't really hear about David for a while. Bible kind of left him alone. Talk about how Saul's battling the Philistines. I'm paraphrasing really here. And then we get to the battle against Goliath. Very popular story. The whole world even talks about David and Goliath. I remember when the whole GameStop thing happened between the average everyday trader and the hedge funds, and they said it was David versus Goliath. So everybody knows about David and Goliath. And so David goes to go give food to his brothers because his father said, go give some food to your brothers. I know they're hungry. Let's make sure that our family is taken care of. Okay, good. Now he approaches his brothers. He hears about the Goliath. He hears about the challenge that he gave, and nobody wants to fight him. Everybody's quaking, and everyone is fearful, and oh my God. Again, why did that happen? Because Israel's not focusing on the grace of God. They're focusing on what God can or cannot do, or what God has done or either what he has done or what he has not done. That's what they're basing it off of. If God had sent a big hailstone to crush Goliath, they'd be like, yes. And a lot of us are like that. We got the big Goliath problem in front of us. And we refuse to get up. We want God to send down a hailstone, send a fire from heaven, and let it burn. God is looking at us like, nope. And David, I'm showing you something. David showed up on the scene, and he hears about it, and he's like, are you kidding me? I'm using regular terms now. Like, are you kidding me? What's going on here? Well, why are you all quaking against one man? I think he maybe would have understood. I mean, this is my personal opinion. I think he would have understood a little bit better if it was, oh, you're facing a whole army of these guys. He's like, you're facing one man, and y'all are this scared. All that type of stuff because he's a giant. Okay, got it. Now, the brothers get upset with David, say you only come here because you want to see a battle and all this stuff. Do you know what they're doing? They're basing their faith in David on what they think David can do or not do. Same way how they were fearful of Goliath because they were basing their faith in God on what God can do or quote unquote cannot do. Or what he has done or has not done. They're not focusing on knowing who God is. And even though the horn of the oil melted on David and they saw it, they didn't face who David is. Because at that point, he was already anointed to be the next king of Israel. And they didn't even see the significance of that. Let me tell you something for a second here. Without grace, we are blind, deaf, and dumb. We see nothing, we hear nothing, and we say nothing. And when we try, we see nonsense. And when we try, we hear nonsense. And when we open up our mouth, we speak nonsense. Talking about the grace of God here. So they open up their mouth. They hear nonsense, see nonsense, start talking nonsense, ready to start up a whole fight. And David is so determined. And you see, when you have the grace of God and you're walking with God, you start a commotion. Not confusion. There's confusion, then there's commotion. David didn't start confusion. He was very direct. He was getting ready to go up there, and everybody was like, no, are you crazy? And it started a whole commotion. Because yes, I know David knew Saul, but I mean, Saul didn't know David was there. He had no idea. No one came and said, oh, King Saul, David, the one who used to play the harp for you, has now shown. No. He didn't come there for the king. He came there for his brothers. And his brothers were poor men. So let me explain something to you. When you are poor and you're in the ranks of the army, you're not near the center of the camp. You're not near the king and all that. You're on the fringes because you're poor. Unless you're a nobleman or someone of money or high prominence, it's kind of separated by class, high class, middle class, low class. I mean, that's how it works. So David is trying to go out there and everyone's like, no. And it got to the point where it got to Saul's ears because Saul's like, what is going on out here? Why is everybody? First of all, Saul's probably thinking the Philistines are coming. So he's like, okay, what's happening? They said, David is here, and they explain the situation. David goes in front of him. Saul's like, you want to do what now? I'm paraphrasing now. You want to do what? Who you want to fight? And Saul's looking at him like, I know you can play, but since when can you fight? Again, when you don't have the grace of God. You see nonsense. You say nonsense. And you hear nonsense. Because you're only looking at what your natural eyes can see, you're not seeing the spiritual eyes. So he's like, all I know is that you can play, and you play beautifully, but playing and fighting are two separate things. Okay, fine. David said, listen, I will fight him. Saul was just like, but why? It's now David now, because he walked with God. When you walk with God, man, you go through trials and tribulations because that's the only, listen, we need to face the reality. Only through pressure do we grow as human beings. We need to get over that. Only through any time we have life nice and easy, we don't grow. That's just human nature. I don't know why. I can't change it. I just accept it. Only through pressure can we grow. Do you have any idea how much pressure your body is underneath in puberty? When growth hormone is released, when testosterone and estrogen is released, to allow you to start to develop into the man or into the woman that you ought to be. You have any idea how much stress is actually your body's under? Because it's constantly shooting up inches and this part's growing and that part is developing and this part changes. It's a lot of pressure, but the body does it because it must do what? It must grow. Its purpose is to survive and to grow. Constant pressure. That's the only way we come through. When baby wants to eat meat, but can't eat meat, it's pushing and it's putting its body under pressure. and you have to rip up one little piece of meat, and you watch that baby who only got 2 teeth in their mouth, mashing up the little piece of meat. It's putting its body under pressure, but he's saying it's my time to eat meat. She's saying it's my time to eat meat. We don't grow without pressure. So David said, let me tell you about my pressure. Let me tell you what the grace of God has done for me. And he said, I faced the lion. And when I faced the lion, I killed the lion. And when I faced the bear, I killed the bear. Now, what are you telling me? Listen to me. I'm not going to tell you how I killed the bear. I ain't going to tell you how I killed the lion. All I know is I faced the lion, and I killed the lion. And I faced the bear, and I killed the bear. So it was in the Old Testament, so in the New Testament. The blind man said, I don't know whether Jesus is a sinner or not. All I know, I was blind, but now I can see. When he found grace, that's when he went from being blind to being able to see. And he told him, I can't tell you about the man's history. I don't know anything about him. All I know is I was blind, and now I can see. I ain't got nothing else to say to you. David, pull the record. Show you what the grace of God, when you walk with God, what it will take you through. You see, the grace of God is not about us living a blissful life. No. The grace is about showing us that we can overcome life. That's what grace is about. The grace of God is like you can overcome life. Because I have conquered life and I've conquered death. Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. Jesus overcame death when he rose from the grave. So now that we are walking in that grace, he's like, you don't have to fear. That's why we say no weapon formed against me shall prosper. Because Jesus said, I overconquered this life and I also conquered death. You have nothing more to fear. Because you have the grace of God. You're walking with the grace of God. Everywhere you go, the grace of God follow you. Everywhere you step, the grace of God step before you. And when you back up, the grace of God backs up with you. When you go to the left, the grace of God go to the left. And when you go to the right, the grace of God go to the right. The grace of God is about allowing you and I to walk with God. The grace of God is about allowing you and I to have that fellowship with God. So I can say, and he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own. And the joy that we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. Because I got grace to overcome. David pulled the record and said, let me tell you about grace. And because I faced that grace, remember I said you have to understand your journey. So David was coming into understanding of his journey and understanding who he is. So when Saul said, all right, since you got all that testimony, take my armor. There's the next problem with us. You see, when you only focus on what you can do or cannot do, what God can do, cannot do, all that, when that's the only focus, you'll pick up people's armor. And because this person said, yes, this will work, and we leave our own armor, what God gave us, what we have proven through our own experience, and leave that alone. Pick up somebody else's sword that is too heavy. Or pick up somebody else's sword that is too light. Because it can be too heavy, and it can be too light. Or it can become unbalanced. When they made swords back in the day, they want a balanced sword. You want that because when you hold it, Bishop, man, it's like an extension of your arm. It's like you're not even moving it. I mean, it's a part of you. But because we pick up somebody else's sword and pick up somebody else's shield and all that kind of stuff, we don't have the balance. We don't have we're seesawing back and forth, and we're going into battle talking about we're going to win. We lose. And when David, knowing that he has the grace of God on him, and he put the armor on because, he's trying to honor the king, and when he tried, listen, sometimes we do that. But before you go into battle, try it first. We're human. And if you give me a good suggestion, I will listen to what you have to say. But I'm going to run it through a test first. In my job, everything we touch, if we touch the wrong thing, everything mash up. So before we go ahead and do what we're going to do, we test it out first. And we write down the results of the test, pass or fail. And if it failed, we go back to the drawing board. And if it passed, we go forward. And we put in the risk Even when it passes, because sometimes when it passes, you see that some of the risk that might come up, and we make sure that the client knows the risk. Say, do you still want to go forward? If they say yes, we go forward. You got to test it out first. Some of us, we just grab it up and say, I'm going into battle. Yes, Jesus. And then we come back to church talking about, you don't understand. Don't understand what? You pick up that doesn't belong to you, and you never try it yet, and run into battle and gonna get beat. You gotta take up the rod that's in your own hand. So David tried it. He tried it. He said, wait a minute, this is not me. And he said, no, man, I can't go into this. He said, I've never tried these. When I was fighting the lion, I was fighting the bear. I never had no armor. I didn't have no sword. I didn't have no shield. I had no spear, no nothing. Not to mention, David was still a youth. Saul was a big man. By his own, if you compare Saul to his peers, that means other men, he was already a head taller than them. So Saul was a very tall guy. David wasn't. David was still a youth. He was still growing. So David is yay down here. Can you imagine? Yay down here, David is trying to put on up here Saul armor. It's not like they said, let's make a new armor for David. They didn't have no time for that. So David's like, man, this stuff is heavy. It doesn't fit properly. This feels weird. I'm taking this off. And David go now with grace, walking with God. David find his purpose. He said, now I know why I'm here. My father sent me to go give bread and food to my brethren. But now I know why I'm here. You see, when you walk with God and someone gives you direction and you go to a certain spot, because your spiritual eyes are always open, when you arrive, sometimes you realize the reason why I came in was A, but there's a B reason now. There's a reason called B, and I realized that's the reason why God wanted me here. You start to look for the spiritual reason. Why am I here? You start to look for the spiritual reason. Why was this instruction given? You start to look for the spiritual reason. Like, what is this real story? What's the story behind the story? When they have trials, when I say trials, I'm talking about in court. When they have cases tried in court, they get the defendant's side, they get the prosecutor's side, because they're trying to find the story behind the stories. Trying to disseminate the truth, trying to figure out the truth from left side and the right side. So David realized, now I know why I'm here. I am here because all of you are afraid, and you're allowing the enemy to beat you spiritually. That's why you need the grace of God, because fear allows us to let the enemy beat us spiritually before he beats us physically. When the enemy came to attack Job, he was hoping that when he took away everything from him, he could beat him spiritually. And when he realized that he couldn't, that's when he touched his body. And then when he realized even after that, he gets really frustrated now. Because he's just like, the whole point of this was to get you to spiritually sin, not physically. It was for you to curse God and say, I don't care about God no more. But Job held on because Job had grace. So David, we know the story, goes, fights Goliath, grabs 5 stones, and he slays Goliath. And he kills Goliath. And he killed Goliath with grace. Because when you have grace and the enemy talk to you and insult you, you don't look at the enemy and try to match their insult. You say, well, you come to me with sword and spear. Let me tell you about the grace of God. I come to you in the name of the Lord. Insult me all you want. I come with God. When I step into this room, I step in with God. Because we're both walking together. And if you're going to get to me, you have to go through God. And if you get to me, it's only because God allowed it. Because the steps of the righteous man are ordered by the Lord. You need that grace of God. Grace is for you to walk. Not just overcome, for you to walk. Because let me tell you something, sometimes faith fails. Sometimes you get low down in your spirit. Sometimes, man, you feel like you don't want to go on. And sometimes you just feel like I want to give up. I'm over this. I can't be bothered. This is too much for you here. But when you roll back the curtain and you think about the grace of God, and what God has done for you, and what he has done for me, it spurs your faith back on. See, grace keeps you primed. You might get low, but you're still primed. So when this grace comes in and it sparks the spark plug, the fire of faith starts to grow.